This is Dr. Jim Applegate, visiting professor at the Center for the Study of Education Policy at Illinois State University. And we're doing a series of videos tied to some PowerPoint blogs that you'll be able to find on the site that talk about some important issues as we think about mapping the future of Illinois higher education. And the first thing we want to talk about is mapping the future in a way that allows our institutions to, as I like to put it, find high ground in the coming demographic tsunami. Many of you may have read Nathan Grau's most recent book, Demographics and the Demand for Higher Education, or McGee's Breakpoint. And if so, you know, if you look at the data in those books and the maps that are provided, that the Midwest and the Northeast are at the epicenter of a demographic tsunami. It's already breaking on the shores of many of our states and for many of our institutions. For some, it still just looks like a wave in the distance, but when it hits the shore, it will have devastating impacts on some of our institutions. Grau predicts that there'll be a more than 15% decline in demand for college over the next decade. Particularly in states like Illinois, we are sort of again at the epicenter of this demographic tsunami in terms of our traditional markets. If you look at the projections from studies like Knocking on the College Door, an annual report put out by the Western Interstate Commerce, the WICHE, the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education, you'll find that there is a projected enormous drop-off in the number of high school graduates in many of our Midwestern and Northwestern states. In Illinois particularly it is most dramatic. So basically the traditional markets that our institutions have looked to preserve their enrollments, the high school graduates who are middle to upper middle class, largely white, those numbers are declining. This is not a guess. This is not a projection with some estimate of confidence. We know how many babies were born in each of the years leading up to today and going forward. We know how many will be college age. We're also in the Midwest are obviously experiencing a dramatic decline in population generally that we hope to be able to turn around. The Pew Charitable Trust has projected in Illinois a 9.6% decline in the number of workers lost. This in the Midwest as a whole, this will total about 12 million workers lost as we see outmigration to other regions of the country. So in the face of all this, is there any hope? Well, yes, there is. First of all, Grau's projections, and most of those that are made in terms of this demographic tsunami, are based on an assumption. And Nathan Grau has talked about this since the publication of his book, that college-going rates will remain constant for the different groups within our regions. So the low college-going rates for students of color, the low college-going rates for low-income students, the low college participation rates for adults that we've seen historically will be sustained, and at the same time then we'll see the decline in the numbers of traditional students and especially our traditional market. So there is opportunity here if we don't treat those college-going rates as fait accompli. We can change those. We can increase and provide greater college opportunity, as we should anyway, for the groups that have been underserved traditionally by higher education, particularly again in the Midwest and Northeast, which are ironically our most college-rich, if you would, regions in the country. So what are these markets? Well, I think there are three primary ones we should be thinking about, and the mixture of these that an institution might embrace in order to help get to high ground and preserve its future in the face of this tsunami that's breaking on our shores are international students, traditional age students, particularly low-income students of color, first generation, whom we've not done a very good job of getting to college, and I'll talk about the data on that in just a moment, and a massive adult learner market, which has various components, which I'll also talk about in just a moment. Well, first let's talk about the international market. Now, this is not appropriate for all institutions. I work for people who are involved in attracting international talent to the United States. We need that talent. Unfortunately, we're not doing the very best job in making it easy for that talent to come to our country these days, but we do need it in order to have a successful country and a successful economy. Now, in addition to the political climate in the United States today, which is not helping in terms of the rhetoric and also many changes in visa policies, etc., we're also facing greater competition around the globe if we want to win the international global talent war. Countries and regions of the world are working harder to hold on to their talent. They understand the importance of this. There's also a great deal of we have other competitors in the international market. Canada, England, Australia, even China now is attracting large numbers of international students. So the competition is great. Now, we've always felt like that the United States was a magnet, and it is, for international talent. Our universities are always ranked well, but it is still the case that even though we have 10 times the population of a country like Canada, that according to recent numbers, we only have 1 million international students, and those numbers have been declining the last couple of years, and Canada has 500,000. So we're hugely larger than Canada in terms of our higher ed terrain as well as our population, yet we only have double the number of international students, so we could do better. Another problem for the United States is our price point. Today, a lot of universities are thinking about international students that weren't thinking about them before, and honestly, some of that has to do with revenue strains. But the thought there is that international students will be full pay or more students who will bring a lot of money to the U.S. This limits our market internationally to the one percenters, basically, around the world who can afford to come to the United States at our high price point. There are other ways that we can open up international markets to a rising middle class. Most surveys suggest these hundreds of millions of people around the world want to come to the U.S. for college, but we have to find a way to lower our price points. So, for example, in some areas they are developing pathways programs for international students where they begin at community colleges, save money, and then move on to top universities for the degrees. So there's a lot of work to be done in this area, but I do think for many institutions, more than one might think, there is an opportunity to expand enrollment for international students, both the traditional market and what I call the rising middle class. Now, perhaps even more importantly, when we look at domestic student populations, we have not been doing a great job in getting many of these students to our campuses, much less keeping them and graduating them. Now, who are these 21st century domestic students in the domestic market? Well, the Complete College America tells us that 43% attend two-year institutions, 37% are enrolled part-time, 32% are working full-time, 25% are over the age of 30, and more struggle with homelessness and food insecurity and other problems associated with cultural and economic stressors. And probably most surprisingly to some federal and state policymakers, only 15% of these students attend four-year colleges and live on campus. So we have a different domestic market in general that we haven't adapted to from a policy, in some cases, enrollment practice standpoint. And we have a growing group of students, first generation, students of color, low income, and adult learners. The good news is, as we try to open up these markets, many of these students have overlapping needs. So it's not like we have to develop a full, unique set of programs for each group of students we recruit. Many of the programs, student supports, different ways of delivering learning that work for one group work for several of them. Now let's look for a moment at the traditional age market, but the one that we're missing, the underserved market. If you look at the overall progress of U.S. higher education with this group, it's not been very encouraging over the last few decades. The top 100 colleges in the United States have made no progress in reducing underrepresentation for African American and Hispanic students since 1980. That's from a detailed analysis by the New York Times. I repeat, no progress in reducing underrepresentation. U.S. higher education as a whole, the Education Trust tells us, has closed graduation gaps by a whopping 1% in the last decade. At this rate, it'll take us a century to get the gaps completely closed. Significant student success gaps exist at all Illinois universities. And finally, for 2013 to 2017, to zero in on Illinois again, African American and student enrollment in Illinois colleges was down 26%, 30% at community colleges, and 14% at universities. That's from data provided by the Illinois Board of Higher Education. And so also when we look at the income barriers, we talk a lot about the affordability of higher education, and we see the impact of our lack of affordability most dramatically on low-income students. The Pell Institute, which in full disclosure, I must admit I'm on the advisory board, in its most recent set of indicators on college access and opportunity, showed that the group in the highest quartile, bachelor degree attainment by age 24 for dependent family members by family income in the highest quartile was at about 58%. For the lowest quartile, it was at 11%, or almost a sixth of that. So that means that we're missing 90% of that lowest income quartile market. The second quartile is only 20% with a college degree, and the third quartile, which is solidly middle class, only has a 41% with a bachelor's degree by age 24. So we're missing half that market. So we have to find a way to lower the barriers for lower income and even middle class students. And we have a huge market we can access there to help us enroll more of these students and then do the work necessary to ensure that they graduate and succeed. It's not just income, of course. I guess I think of it more like overlapping Venn diagram circles. It's not the same, but there is some overlap in the problems we have with the gaps for African American and Hispanic students. In Illinois, if you look at the gaps, and all this data is provided in the PowerPoint that accompanies this presentation, this discussion, we find huge gaps in Illinois for Black and Hispanic students, as well as a smaller Native American population, so that this again is a massive market that if we were doing a better job of working with the K-12 pipeline, we could recruit thousands and thousands and thousands more students. And in Illinois, we have a great tool for doing that, which is the MAP program, the Monetary Award Program, which is our need-based scholarship program, which I will talk about its importance in another one of the videos in this series. And finally, beyond the traditional age market for low income and students of color, where we're missing out on huge numbers of students, there is the massive growing adult learner market. In Illinois, 15% of the workforce has some college and no degree, meaning that they went to college but never finished. Many of them have many college hours, maybe some debt, but no degree. And we know the economic analyses show that not having the degree has a very negative impact on one's economic well-being. So we need to work on that adult market. If you add the adult in Illinois' workforce with no high school only, or some college and no degree, that's almost half of our workforce that we need to reach out to and to help them come back and achieve certificates, certifications, and degrees that will equip them for good jobs and careers in the 21st century economy. And there's also another market that is growing, and more and more people are talking about this adult market in terms of upskilling. If many of the predictions are correct from Kinsey and others, 40% of the jobs globally will be either eliminated or radically transformed through the full implementation of automation and artificial intelligence. There will be new jobs created by these developments, but they will up the ante on the amount of education required to get those jobs. So there's going to be, even for some of the adults out there in the workforce now with some certifications or certificates or degrees, there's going to be an enormous market to give them the opportunity to come back and upscale their degrees with additional certifications, maybe even other degrees to help them stay up and ready for career advancement in this new automated, artificial intelligence driven economy. So the adult market is massive. Now, getting ready for adult learners, much like preparing for larger numbers of low-income students or students of color, means that there have to be radical transformations or significant transformations on campuses around student supports, around faculty development, around the way we deliver courses. I won't go into great detail, but an organization located in here in Illinois called CALE, the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, is a leading advocate on the adult learner side and also a leading teacher of best practice. And they have developed what they call an ALFI assessment, ALFI, Adult Learner Focused Institution, that helps you look at everything you do on your campus, from your marketing to your enrollment management strategies, to your class delivery, to your student supports, to your housing, to your food, cafeteria work, and forces you to ask the question, are these things done in a way that focus on the needs of a typical adult learner in that particular example? And when every institution I've known that's done that assessment, while it finds it does some things okay, it finds many things where almost unintentionally or without thinking, they are doing a lot that is putting barriers in the way of this massive adult learner market. So that same kind of analysis needs to be done around all of these new markets so that we don't just enroll the new 21st century student that we need to survive, but also that we help them to grow and succeed and get the degrees they need to do well in life. Now, this is particularly important for comprehensive universities, comprehensive regional universities, community colleges, and private colleges that are not elite and especially well endowed. They are right now they're standing on the beaches as this tsunami breaks on the beach. And these are the institutions who already serve many of the low-income, students of color, adult learners that we manage to serve in higher education. Our elite institutions, unfortunately, as I noted with the New York Times study, for all of their rhetoric, don't do a whole lot to address these markets. And it would be a great tragedy if these types of institutions were ones that began to disappear, since they are the ones probably best equipped to serve the new markets I'm talking about. In fact, Jorge de Flor-Alva recently did a study called on social mobility, talking about the university next door, which showed the enormous impact economically of enrolling in a comprehensive university, looking at over 300 comprehensive universities, finding large numbers of students who enter those universities in the bottom two quintiles of income in the economy in terms of family or independent income, and ending up after a certain number of years of graduating in the top two quintiles of income. So these are the institutions that are really the drivers of opportunity for the new markets I'm talking about, and keys to the role of higher education and social mobility, and yet these are the very institutions that are most threatened by the demographic changes we're talking about. So it is really important that these institutions begin to think about the changes that I'm talking about in order to sustain themselves and continue to do the good work that they do. Well, I hope this has been not a hopeless presentation, but a hopeful presentation, in the sense that we are going to experience significant demographic shifts, particularly in the Midwest and Northeast and parts of the South. It does propose a tremendous challenge particularly to certain segments of higher education, comprehensive universities, non-elite, non-rich privates, and community colleges, very important parts of our sector. But if we don't treat the numbers that are being presented to us as a fait accompli, but understand that they are based on us not doing any better than we're currently doing with the new markets that we have in front of us, and we do make the changes and adaptations I've been discussing, I think there is great opportunity for higher education to actually end up at the end of this, after the wave has receded, doing a better job of serving the students who need us most.